So let's jump into a Patreon listener question. We got quite a few here in the queue, and let's pull one up from MassiveGains. And once again, if you are interested in asking a question on the Patreon, just be sure to check the description below. We have a whole bunch of cool little perks that you could get for joining the Transformers Slag Patreon. Now, let's jump into it. So MassiveGains asks, and let's pull this up here, what is the most shelf-warmer toy in all of Transformers? I'm sure you've experienced the tuner Mudflap era in Canada as much as it was a product here in the United States. Do you have your own stories? Thanks again, MassiveGains. Oh boy. So for those who don't know what shelf warming, or I've heard the term peg warming or shelf formers for Transformers. Essentially what it is we sometimes hit a weird era where a wave of product comes out and everything in that wave sells except for like a one specific character. And they just linger. And it starts to, you could always argue, like, if one of your stores has like a case of 4 characters and, the 3 characters selling, that one stays behind, that's one thing. But when you return to that store and it's the only figure on the shelf and it's a sea of them, that's a shelf warmer. There's a difference between like an unpopular toy and something that's almost like a cancer to the shelving display. And I mean, just to go off of Transformers for a second, my first earliest memory of this, and it's hilarious when I think about it, was I think the first time I even understood the concept was at a very young age. I was born in 1983, and I want to say it was probably 1987, 1988. I was at a toy store across from my house with my grandmother, and I saw the infamous Return of the Jedi Star Wars Rancor Keeper. And anyone who knows Star Wars knows what I'm talking about. Just this like fat dude with like a shawl on his head. And this store just had a wall of only him. Only him. And I remember as a kid going like, wow, he must be really popular. Because I was just like, why is there so many of this one figure? And then my grandmother's like, do you want one? And the crazy thing was, I don't remember the exact number, but she bought it for me because they were practically getting rid of them. And if I remember correctly, doing research, I've had this discussion about the Rancor Keeper with other toy collectors, but I believe he was a $250 in 1984 when he was first released, his MSRP, $199 in the United States. And he just I think he was probably 50 cents like back then. And this was, I want to say 1988, which 50 cents was like a cup of coffee for my grandmother or something. So she picked it up for me. And I remember almost right away losing his shawl and his little weapon that he came with. I guess we'll call it the Rancor prod. And I had that figure in my collection to this very day. But he was the first time that I ever experienced that, where it was like, oh man, like, there's just this one character that obviously is not popular, and there's thousands of them on this wall. Now, when we jump into Transformers, I don't really have a good number to give you when it comes to, let's say, Generation 1. Because outside of maybe from what I've seen in, let's say, the secondary market years later, the only stuff that I ever see in large numbers that's mint in card, mint in box of Generation 1 that still is relatively affordable because there's just so many of them, I would have to say stuff like the Jump Starters. 1985, Generation 1 Jump Starters, mint in box, $40-$50. You can't say that about many Generation 1 toys outside of, let's say, I don't know, maybe carded Action Masters. So if I wanted to take a guess, back then what probably was the craziest just glut of G1 product, but even then I can't confirm that they were shelf warmers. Maybe there was just a lot of them. They just weren't, they're not show characters, so they weren't popular. And as a result, the secondary market just hasn't been, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for, kind to it. But, the argument can then be given to Pretenders and stuff like that, even though they've been in Master Force, but and the comics. I don't know. It's just that they always seem like they would have been someone. And I'm only basing that from my experience in the secondary market today, wheeling and dealing with Transformer product. And Jumpstarter's mint in box even to this day. Don't pull a big amount of money. And loose ones, $5 a pop, any day of the week. So, but I do have a good idea of what was shelf forming when we get closer to, let's say, the 90s era. Because that was something that when I was really, G1 wasn't paying attention, Turtle era, I was buying Ninja Turtle toys. But even then, when I was a kid buying Ninja Turtle toys, wasn't really paying attention to what was shelf forming. There was nothing that was drastically obvious for me. Like that Rancor Keeper all those years ago. That'll stick with me for the rest of my life just because seeing that wall of them. But when we get to, let's say, Beast Wars, that's when I started to really notice stuff that just couldn't move. And if I had to really pinpoint one of the first ones that I really started to notice, it was probably Wave 3, Series 3, if you will, Transketo, the Mega Scale, which I guess today we would call a Voyager. The Mega Scale Transketo, I remember just seeing a whole bunch of them almost everywhere I would go during that time. And Transketo, he also shipped with, I believe, Inferno, and I think that was it for that assortment for that size of that wave. But there was just so many of him, and he just wasn't very popular as a toy, I guess, in comparison to a lot of the other stuff that came out that wave. I mean, even to a minor extent, I could say okay, well, that same wave, you have I guess Deluxe Jetstorm and Deluxe Maniterror, and those ones also probably weren't popular. Again, non-show characters will always do less than show characters. But it also existed during a time where Beast Wars was at its peak popularity in a lot of ways. It really reached its peak by Wave 3. And that's when stores start buying a lot of product to fill the shelves. And then you always have those outliers. And so I think Transketo, probably of the Beast era, was one of those. I know that also, when you get to, let's say, I'll give an honorable mention of the Beast era. Years later, when we're already in the movie toy era, I remember finding a Scavenger, the Transmetal Scavenger Voyager, beat up in a Zellers. But if you're a Canadian, anyone knows Zellers just holds on to everything forever. I don't want to say that Scavenger shelf formed, although I know some people might argue that one. But from personal experience, I never thought that there was a lot of them. It's just he just wasn't popular, and one or two of them would be hanging around for, many, many years. Same thing with Drill Bit. Drill Bit, amazing thing with Drill Bit, I found a Drill Bit at a Sears in 2008. And it still had full price because that Sears, just like Zellers in Canada, just would not let go of product and would just leave the same price until inflation almost makes it disappear because the same price sticker stays on it. But yeah, again, I want to say Transketo. Not a very good toy either. Unless you're a fan of Transketo, sorry about that. But when we really go into Beast Machines, there was a lot of stuff that was unpopular, but by then they were already kind of pulling back on a lot of stuff that they were buying. I think already Beast Machines, it was pretty clear that it wasn't that popular, so stores weren't buying it. How it works is, if it's popular, the store buys a lot of cases of it. But if they buy a lot of cases of it, then there's obviously going to be something that might not be popular and might stick around, and that's what creates that visual image of the Shelfwarmer or the Pegwarmer, because there's just so much of that one guy. Where if something is an unpopular character, but they don't buy a lot of cases of it, yeah, he's just going to be that one or two figures that are always left on the peg. So it doesn't create that obviousness of it. And when we go into stuff like, let's say, the Armada era, and, when we get to Armada, then it's okay, that's when we returned really to Pegwarmers. Because I know that Beast Machines and Robots in Disguise 1.0 in 2000, there really wasn't anything that was just a problem for retail. It was just more like, oh, okay, maybe this random spy changer doesn't do well, or maybe in Beast Machines, like, that Optimus Primal Deluxe just didn't sell very well, but there wasn't like a sea of them. But when we got to Armada, we had the first like return of that problem, and I call it the Sea of Orange now, which was the Laserbeaks and the Deluxe Smokescreens. And it's funny because I love Deluxe Smokescreen as a toy. There's nothing wrong with it. And Laserbeak was what he was, but those two just were not popular. And so many times during those early years of Armada, Wave 1 and 2, you would just see so many of those two. And again, like Smokescreen, I think is more of a problem because Laserbeak, even though he was a deluxe shaped packaging, he was a higher price point, and sometimes higher price point stuff, much like Transketo, could also be a detriment. Not even the character not being in the show, where Laserbeak and Smokescreen both appeared in the show. Obviously, Smokescreen more than Laserbeak, but it's just Smokescreen wasn't popular, I guess, with kids. They didn't want an orange, crane truck, I guess. And I thought it was a fun toy, and I love his Minicon Liftor. So maybe I was just out of touch, but those two, man, were they not popular? They were just not popular. And when we get into, like, let's say, Energon, nothing really sticks out in my mind that was, like, blatantly obvious. Again, stuff that wasn't popular, but nothing that really stuck out. When we get to Cybertron, I know that there was a point where just that Voyager/Ultra Scale Mudflap just was not doing well. The Mudflap that was a blue truck at the time. Also kind of a crane. Kind of funny how that works. And yet another crane that didn't do well. And then when we get to, I guess alternators and stuff like that, there really wasn't anything that stuck out to me. And even when we get to like movie toys, like when we start like the first 2007 movie, there really wasn't anything that really stuck out to me. Maybe some of those Real Gear guys, those Real Gear dudes didn't do very well, but there wasn't like a sea of them that it was such a problem. But I think that when we finally hit like just massive issues, was we had a small, like, to me it was like the biggest indicator was we had Revenge of the Fallen Devastator in that big box set one, right? I remember my Walmart just having a wall of them and nobody was buying it. But again, that was an expensive product when it was brand new. And then I just remember one day it just all disappeared. I don't know if they liquidated it or whatever, but they managed to get rid of it. So it didn't really stay very long. It was like, wow, that's a huge wall of that, and then it was gone. So was it not popular? Hard to say because it didn't linger like a lot of other shelf warmers in the back in the day used to. But then we get to the dark era. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. And 2010 and 2011 were really like peak in terms of engineering and product for Transformers. There was a lot of really good stuff coming out around that time. We were just coming off of Transformers Animated, which had a lot of great figures, going into Transformers Prime. And we were just coming off of, the Transformers 2010 line, which was like an extension of Revenge of the Fallen, and getting some of those early Dark of the Moon toys. So we just had a lot of really good stuff coming out. But at the same time, because of the success of Revenge of the Fallen and how, like, Transformers was as popular as it ever after 2009, stores were just buying cases and cases and cases and cases and cases of Transformer product. And on top of that, and I want to blame even Hasbro a little bit for this, for what I'm going to refer to, I think it was also them misjudging the popularity of their key character of Bumblebee. And when we had pretty much the first two, like, I guess because you have the Transformers Prime first edition wave, and then you have the first wave of Transformers Prime, which I guess they called it Robots in Disguise, if that's not confusing. And then you also, at the same time while that was out, the first wave of Dark of the Moon toys. And Bumblebee just ruined retail. It's like everybody bought everything but Bumblebee. And that became a meme before there was such thing as a meme. It was just the sea of yellow. It was just, the hive. You know what? I'm going to post on I'm going to post on Twitter some images because I want to show like just how crazy this was. And I'll post them obviously in the segment here too, but to get them in high res just to see how deep the pegs would go and stuff like that. And it's absolutely crazy how long that was a problem. It was such a problem that it just kept going and going, where I remember there was one Toys R Us near my house that there was just nothing for like an entire month. It was just, you would show up and it'd be nothing but Bumblebees, and just me going like, oh my God, they got to get rid of these things. This is terrible. And it was insane. Like, no joke. If I had to like estimate, you're talking like that Toys R Us, you'd walk in and there might have been 50 to 60 first edition Bumblebees, maybe 50 to 40 robots in disguise Bumblebees, Bumblebee masks, like just Bumblebee product, and then you went to the Dark of the Moon section, and there's all the Bumblebee toys from that, and then the large, they made that stupid, like, I guess it was a leader class scale Bumblebee, which no one wanted. It's totally out of scale, out of your figures for Dark of the Moon. And it was just terrible. And these guys were just taking up the shelves like crazy. The one good thing that came of all of that was sooner or later, Toys R Us just couldn't take it, and they started liquidating them in huge numbers. And TFCon, which always, was looking for the next mold for one of their custom class figures, we took advantage of that, bought, I think it was 60. We bought 60 mint on card first edition Bumblebees, and I believe they were $5 a piece Canadian, which you can imagine probably was like $3.50 at exchange at the time. $5 a piece each, and we made that the custom class figure. We turned it into Decepticharge based off of the Alternator character. You kind of, maybe I'll post an image of that. Kind of Google that and see the madness. But so there was at least a good reason for that story. Is that, even though there was a whole bunch of them, it was bonkers. It was just absolutely nuts how many Bumblebees there were. And I don't think we'll ever experience that ever again, because Walmart is pretty careful with what they do, with how much stock they buy now. Like, yeah, I think like the only thing that's closest to shelf warming now with Walmart is Drop Shot, I want to say. No, not Drop Shot. Dropkick, excuse me. Dropkick from the Bumblebee movie, his studio series. There seems to be a ton of those. But when I say a ton, I mean, I'm seeing like 7, and again, for a Walmart display, 7 is a lot. Hey, there's some lingering, G1 reissues. Like, I'm still seeing like Bumblebee and Swerve. The G1 Minibot reissues are still kind of kicking around. But not, when I say kicking around, I mean, hey, it's been a while now. You guys are still kicking around, and there's like 4 of them. So, nothing in comparison to this Bumblebee from 2011, where it was just, you're talking, a single character that would make an entire shelving today. It's absolutely nuts how bad it was back then. And the only one that comes closer to that, and it's what MassiveGains' question was, what he mentioned, Tuner Mudflap. There was a repaint of not Dark of the Moon, Revenge of the Fallen Mudflap, but it was called Tuner Mudflap, which was, different color scheme. And for some reason, just no one wanted that thing. No one wanted Mudflap. They didn't like the twins. Why would you want a repaint of it that's not even movie accurate? And at one point, there was just tons of Tuner Mudflaps. But that one was more short-lived. I'd have to say maybe it was like a month or two that they lingered, and then they somehow managed to get rid of them. Again, it was Revenge of the Fallen, so the popularity was still kind of at its peak. By the time we reached 2011 and going into Dark of the Moon, Transformers was kind of weighing a little bit and going on that downward spiral. So there was just too much product and not enough people interested. Kids who, let's say, saw the 2007 movie, they got their Bumblebee figure back then, or they got a Bumblebee figure from Revenge of the Fallen. By the time they started doing yet another muscle car-shaped, Bumblebee figure in Transformers Prime, I mean, you put a Transformers Prime Deluxe Bumblebee next to your average Camaro movie Bumblebee, to the parent, it looks the same. It looks like the same yellow car. And so there was and not to mention when you have first edition, Transformers Prime Bumblebee next to the first wave of Transformers Prime RID Bumblebee. Practically might as well be the same toy to a parent or to even a kid who might have a discerning eye. So it's just, there was just so much of it. And to this day, it's like, I don't think we'll ever experience something like that again, because Toys R Us isn't really a thing in the States anymore. And even in America, while we do have a big Transformers section, I've never seen one thing really stick out more than anything else. And I go every week. I hit Toys R Us near my place every single week, and I've never seen anything like that since. It's just been a lot more calm. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to go with that Bumblebee. That was a legendary era. And I know that, I want to say, when Tumblr was still kind of a thing, there was even a Tumblr group that had people that were sharing images of Bumblebees just taking over their stores. It was like, it literally was a problem at one point. And I'm pretty sure, and it's funny because I want to say that Hasbro learned their lesson, but they really didn't in a lot of ways, because they still make him the primary focus of a lot of stuff. Maybe in the sense that they don't put out as much Bumblebee product anymore, but the reality is, I don't think they probably put just as much Bumblebee product out back then. It's just, it was such a special, unique scenario back then that's what kind of led to so many of them existing. You know, stores ordering way too much, kids already having a deluxe shaped Camaro already, you know, yellow car Camaro, not needing another one. Collectors kind of maybe even going, well, I got the first edition, why do I need this one or that one or that one? You know, or in the case of even something that's a more movie-accurate deluxe that they got from, let's say, Revenge of the Fallen, I guess Battleblade Bumblebee at the time. Or maybe they were happy with the Human Alliance one, you know, at the time. This is before Masterpiece and everything in Studio Series. So it's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy, but today, I don't think those opportunities present itself. Now when there's a new Bumblebee toy, it's a brand new design that from a silhouette standpoint looks very different. So I think that they're able to get away with it. It's not just the same robot mode, same head sculpt, same design. It's usually a brand new series, a brand new look, and he manages to survive and not have the same problem that we had back in 2011. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. It's a trip down memory lane of the madness, the absolute madness. And I mean, I didn't want to bring up like big expensive guys because there's never a lot of them. Like, you know, like I could say, oh, I went to a Toys R Us and they just had like stacks and stacks of, you know, Trypticon sitting on top of, like, you have the display of your Transformers, and then you had like the display on top of it, out of reach and out of sight of, let's say, Trypticon or something. But I don't want to say those are Shelfwarmers. That's just more big expensive product that was just out of reach, and I guarantee that if those were slightly cheaper, would have been gone. Where, you know, they were practically giving away these Bumblebees at one point, and they still couldn't get rid of them at $5 each. It was nuts. So those are like the true Shelfwarmers. Those are the true ones that really people don't want. And yeah, so that's that. Let me know if you guys had any similar experiences. Did I miss a character? Because, I mean, I'm just going from my own personal experiences here. Montreal is a huge city. It's a huge, huge city. So I have a very good experience and portion to pull from. Not to mention traveling all over Eastern Canada, Toronto, and then going to the States and New York and stuff, you know, during all of that era, and seeing that there was a lot of similar trends. It wasn't just, you know, hey, Quebec Canadians didn't like Bumblebee. It was a common problem. So let me know if you have any similar experiences. If there are any characters that just were not popular in your area and lingered forever. I mean, just to like cap off, like even Laserbeak, like Armada that I mentioned before, ended up seeing him years later during the movie era, in like, I want to say like 2007. So, you know, when you have like a figure that's been around for so long, you know that there's something wrong if it doesn't move. But yeah, let me know, who was it, when it was it, and if there was a lot of them.